Alrighty, I'm back to continue my review for the Exorcist saga, I guess is kind of the way it is. And with the third one, this was the first time watching it ever, like it'll be with the two prequels, and it was with the second one. And never heard a whole lot about this one in particular. Everybody always praised the first one because it was so groundbreaking. Everybody always hated the second one, so you always hear a lot about that. And then there were a lot of production issues with the prequel that became prequels, which I'll get into next time. But this one was kind of the one that kind of flows a lot more under the radar than you'd really expect. And what I've noticed with horror movies, and really most movies in general that make it into the trilogy setting, is that the third one is usually the worst. And not just in like superhero movies. Like everybody always says that Blade 3 is the worst, Spider-Man 3 is the worst, X-Men 3 the worst. And then on the horror side, it's pretty much usually the same thing. Child's Play 3 is terrible. Friday the 13th Part 3 is not good. Really, the only outlier in that whole case is just Nightmare on Elm Street 3, which many people, including myself, will put at the top or in the second place for the entire franchise. And this one kind of fits right in with that area of being damn good. This one has absolutely nothing to do with The Heretic, Exorcist II. Completely just erases that from canon, or at least doesn't acknowledge anything from it. This one feels, I almost want to say, spin off like, because while it acknowledges the first one and a lot of its plot steps from the original, this one follows who was a secondary character in the original, Detective Lieutenant Kinderman, this time played by George C. Scott. And I didn't mention him in my review of the original, mostly because he was a lot more of a, I want to say, a plot device than anything else. Kind of keeping information flowing from one person to the next, informing Karras of the murder at the McNeil house, showing up at the end of the movie to see Karras jump out the window after he's possessed by the demon. And now we swing into this one, which takes place in 1990. They say it's 15 years after the original, but it's actually 17, so I don't know about that one. If it was an accidental continuity error or not, which is why I kind of have to bring up William Peter Blatty, I believe is his name, the original writer for the novel The Exorcist, was so unhappy with the second one that when it came to this one, which was also based on another book of his called Legion, which was a sequel to The Exorcist, this time he came in, wrote the screenplay off of his novel, and directed it. And for a director that I really hadn't heard of before, he really nailed it on this one. I think this was a very well directed film. Very well acted all across the board. And I'm going to put a lot of praise on several actors once we get into this. But the film follows Kinderman as he's trying to figure out what's going on with these series of murders. All ritualistic, all having to do with, in some odd way, back to the events of the first film. And he's trying to piece it together. It has weird coincidences linking it to a killer that was put in the electric chair 15 years earlier, right around the time of the original film, called the Gemini Killer. And his calling card is left on all the bodies, and that can't be. He's dead until Kinderman eventually ends up having to kind of find his way into the real truth of it all, that the Gemini Killer is now possessing people's bodies to continue on his killing spree. Now I kind of have to go all the way back to the beginning because there's another character I forgot in the original who pops up here, a Father Dyer, who was friends with Karras in the original, and again he was more there to kind of play off of Karras to help us get a feel for Karras' character. And at the end of the original, Dyer and Kinderman become friends, and so 15 years later in this film, they're actually very good friends. And I forget, his last name is Wilson, the actor playing Dyer. Him and Scott have wonderful chemistry. They only have about three scenes in this entire movie together, and they're all perfect. You instantly get the feeling that these guys have known each other for decades, giving each other crap. Just, it's that perfect kind of friendship. When you think about how you interact with your friends, at least I do, that's exactly it. If I'm meeting you somewhere and you're late, I'm gonna give you grief, and you're gonna comment like, "I'm so sorry, I'm late. It was," and it's just gonna be one of those things. And these two completely sell a 15-year plus friendship, 100%. And during their meeting, they go out to eat, and we get a feeling for who Kinderman is. He's a detective, but he's also lost any sort of faith in a higher power because he can't. Seeing all of the many things that he's seen, the killings, all the terrible, terrible things you see as a cop, he can't believe that there's a higher power watching out for us. I completely 100% understand that just from my own belief system. So I get where he's coming from. And because it's an Exorcist movie, you know he's going to be tested in that. Which, it's kind of a staple for the Exorcist movies so far, is somebody with trouble having faith, eventually having to deal with that. But this one's a little bit better because it's not a priest this time. It was something I kind of hated about the second one. It was okay, it was what it was. But it just felt a lot like a rehash. At least that little element. And as we're going through, a boy is killed. Gemini, missing finger, has a symbol cut into his hand, decapitated, and crucified. And that's what kind of brings up the memories of the exorcism. Kind of gets that ball rolling. Then the next one is another priest is killed. And then it's Father Dyer who is murdered in a hospital. Now what all three have in common is a drug that paralyzes the body, but it keeps you aware. And they note that it's mostly used for electric shock therapy. So that kind of gets your own ball rolling. And so when Dyer is murdered in the hospital, and nobody knows who was there. The only person who was around, aside from his nurse, was a mental patient who's not all there at all. So we don't know. And the fingerprints found at all three scenes are not connected to anybody. It has to be a copycat, but it can't be a copycat because all of these murders are perfectly identical to the Gemini killer, but facts were left out of any press reports or anything like that. It was only the cops who directly dealt with it who knew all the little stuff. And so that none of that is working. And as Kinderman is going on, trying to figure out what's going on, he meets a patient who 15 years earlier had been dropped off and amnesiac, very catatonic, didn't know nothing. Didn't interact, didn't do anything. Except for a few weeks earlier. A few weeks earlier, he started coming out of it, getting motion back, responding, until he started turning violent about 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks before the film starts. And then things started getting really weird. And one of the things that makes it weird is that this person, this mysterious patient, looks exactly like Father Damien Karras. And Kinderman can't wrap his head around it. It's literally impossible. At the end of the first one, he took a tumble down stone steps. He was massively banged up, skull fractured, broken neck, all the stuff you don't walk away from, so it doesn't work. So he's trying to find out, could this be him? Is this a twin brother? What is it? And then once he goes to speak to him, this patient starts referring to himself as the Gemini killer. And this is where George C. Scott has owned every single scene he's been in throughout this film. But this is the part where he almost gets upstaged completely. Larry Miller returns to play Karras, or at least Karras' body, in a couple of scenes. But Brad Dourif, of course, famous for playing Charles Lee Ray in the original Chucky series, is the Gemini Killer. And so it's sort of two people playing almost two characters in the same body. But when it's the Gemini Killer, it switches to Dorff. When it's not him, it switches to Miller. And weirdly, it works. It works well enough for you to enjoy. I never felt anything like, oh, this isn't working, he's just doing a copy of this actor. Because that stuff like that always isn't easy. Very rarely is it ever perfect. But they managed to do it in such a way here that it works. And Dorff is a very expressional actor with his face, which really means his casting here was great, because naturally a psychotic violent patient is going to be in a straitjacket, strapped down, all that. And yet he's able to completely express everything as this character. And his monologues are just gorgeous. If there's a perfect performance in this movie, it might very well be Dorff, because he owns it so well. And Kinderman's talking to him, doesn't believe him. You're not the Gemini Killer, he's dead. And through their meetings, we learn here's the story of what happened. The Gemini Killer's master, who was the demon who possessed Regan in the first film, found him in the ether after the Gemini Killer was put in the electric chair, and brought him back for revenge. Because naturally the demon didn't enjoy Karras winning at the end of the first film. He wanted revenge. And his revenge was, I'm going to take this killer, put him into Karras' body, and commit all of these terrible, terrible murders through his body, and he'll be forced to watch it. Which is actually pretty good, because we know from the first film that Karras was ultimately a very good man. And so to see all of these terrible murders being committed with his own hands would be hell itself. But because of the extensive brain damage, he ended up in a hospital, catatonic for 15 years, as his brain and body eventually regenerated. And now he's stuck. He can't murder. So the Gemini Killer, his spirit, or he telepathically does it, because it's noted that when he possesses somebody, his body shuts down, Karras' body shuts down, but the brain's activity kicks into overdrive. So like with the first one, it plays with the, is it a psychological thing, like is he psychic, or is it actual spiritual possession and it's linked? It keeps it kind of open-ended, but solid enough you can understand it. And more bodies are dropping. And we kind of get this link that he's wanted Kinderman here. Because the boy who's murdered at the beginning, his mother was the one who discovered the tape Karras provided with Regan's voice. Like, is she talking gibberish or a language? No, it's just English backwards. His mother discovered it. Her son was killed. The first priest killed before Dyer was the priest who gave Karras permission to investigate Regan's possession. And then Dyer, of course, was friends with Karras. The last line in this is Linderman. And eventually the Gemini goes to try and kill Linderman's family. Almost succeeds, but luckily is able to be stopped before Kinderman comes to finally confront him. Now knowing this is true, the possession was true, this is the killer, this is Karras, this is my friend, I have to stop this. And this is where I have to mention kind of a really weird secondary plot. Is over the course of this, it's acknowledged that there's another priest who had performed an exorcism in, I believe they said, Indonesia, Father Morning. And it was said that when he did this exorcism, his hair turned white overnight. Like, alright, it kind of sticks with the old folktale, scared to death to such a degree your hair turns white overnight. I'll live with that. And he only has 2-3 scenes in the entire film. One of which is coming up at the end. But his first two is one, he's just in his little apartment room, and a wind comes through, knocks his cross down. He picks it up, and the room gets dark, and he hears demonic growling. And I forget who the actor's name is, and I do apologize for that. but there's just this zoom in on his face where you see the acknowledgement of, oh, like it's the, I know what's going on now. It's that this very same sixth sense we saw in the first one when Father Merrin sees the statue of the demon. Like it's that moment of complete acknowledgement. And then there's another one probably 15-20 minutes later of Father Morning praying. And then his last one is coming to confront the demon, the Gemini killer, all in Karras' body. And he's decked out. He's ready to do this fight. And the demon even acknowledges him. So it kind of plays into the, is this the same demon that he exorcised? But another thing that they do point out through Linderman, actually, and through the Gemini's monologuing, is a passage in the Bible. And I'm not trying to get too religious here, but in the Bible, Jesus confronted a possessed man and asked him, "Who are you?" And the possessed man responded, "I am Legion, for we are many." And so I'm wondering if that's not kind of the way it worked. Is it's not really a demon, it's multiple things, which is something the Gemini kind of alluded to, that there are many. So I really enjoyed that part anyway. It was interesting. And now I have to get to the final confrontation. So Father Morning comes in to try and exorcise the demon, and as strong as it was in the first film, it's massively stronger here. Like, it explodes the book in Morning's hand, so he can't recite the exorcism. It pins him to the ceiling and starts like searing his flesh to the ceiling so it sticks and rips him, and it's really gross. And he's chucked in the corner dead when Kinderman arrives. And Kinderman is, no, I understand this, and he gets Forrest pushed up against the wall and has to verbally acknowledge, yes, I believe you are this ultimate evil. I believe you're this killer. I believe now. And he gets to see this weird, almost hellish sight of bodies climbing their way out of a hole in the ground and Karras on a cross. And it's all in his head because everything goes back. And the killer or the demon or whoever is in Karras' body acknowledges, this isn't fun for me anymore. I'm done with this. You're not fun to play with anymore. I'm just going to be done with this. And he's going to kill Kinderman. But Morning is able to get enough strength back to reach over and pick up his own crucifix and get Karras' attention to get him to fight the demon. And he's able to retake control enough for Kinderman to be released, get his gun and shoot Karras. And Karras is dying, his last words being, we did it, oh, it's done, and Kinderman ultimately kills him. And our final shot is Kinderman and his partner burying Karras' body finally, where it should have been after the original. The acting in this is honestly top tier, and the directing. Those are two things. While the acting I've enjoyed in the last two, this one definitely stepped it up. All of the scenes were good. The second one was such a low bar. That might very well be why I love this one as much as I do. But again, it's my very first time watching it. It could change the next time or two I watch it. But this is a movie I didn't want to watch at all. I'd heard so many bad things about the second one that I wasn't looking forward to it. So I dragged my feet on ever watching it. I've owned all of them for several months, probably closer to a year. And I just, no, I never had an inkling to throw it in and watch it. And I'm kicking myself for that. Because this is a fantastic, fantastic film. It's not, I wouldn't call it a big horror film. It works with tension. It works with an odd psychological thriller type. And I'd almost, if it wasn't for Blatty being the one behind it all, I would almost think that it followed a Hellraiser look to it. That it was just a spec script, detective tracking down a killer, and we're just gonna rewrite a couple of pages and boom, Exorcist movie. But because he was involved, I know it started as an Exorcist movie. And I think, like with the first one, I said that the psychological aspect of like the first half of, is she crazy? Is this all in her head? It helped carry it through until we can believe that this is all real. And it works with this one too. You get about halfway through before he finds Karis, and you're almost wondering, is this just a psychological thriller? No, it's actually an Exorcist film. And that works out just as fantastic for this one as it did for the original. It never feels like a slow burn. And that's something I hated about the second one. It felt like a slow burn, even though stuff was happening. And like with the first one, I think that the third act, it's not big, explosive, massive like the second one was. And I hated the ending to the second one, but the ending to this one works. Now, granted, I don't love it. I don't love the ending to this one because I feel like the Gemini killer has no part in it. After his murder attempt is stopped by Kinderman at his house, that's it. We don't see any more Brad Dourif. We never know it's him in there, anything like that. So I feel like that was kind of a bad waste. And I really can't, there's nothing exceptionally bad about it. And I do mean that in kind of an odd way. It feels very much like a sequel, but I think because there's a 3 at it is why so many people kind of refuse to watch it. Because you watch the first one, like, that one was good. You watch the second one, you're like, oh my god, that was like pulling my own teeth with a hammer. And you don't have that drive to get to this one, which is an absolute mistake. You can cut the entire second one out. You can almost even cut the first one out to watch this one. Even just a mild running knowledge would do you. Even then, they kind of retread all of the bases in just enough way for you to get enough information to go to the next part. They don't tell you, oh yeah, and remember this possession 15 years ago, little girl Reagan, her mom was an actor. You don't get any of that. They don't even acknowledge her mom, her job, anything like that. It's very tight, very good. And I did do just the theatrical cut. I haven't seen the director's cut that I believe Shout Factory released a couple years ago. But if the theatrical cut was this good, I have pretty high hopes for the director's cut if and when I ever get to it. So where do I put this one? When I got probably halfway through it, just before Kinderman started talking to Karis, I was like, this one's probably going to fall into a 3. It's better than 2, not as good as 1. But I have to give it a 4 out of 5. It is that solid. I don't think it hits iconic status like the first one, because the first one, you don't know what to expect when you're coming into it, and it still pays off. This one might pay off as much after 2 or 3 viewings like the first one does, but I don't know. That might change in the future like every ranking. But right now, I believe it is a very solid 4 out of 5. Everyone should watch it directly after the first one if you want to, or even just throw it on because it's a Tuesday. What else are you going to do? So, I've been Robert. Take it easy.